Welcome to the Determined Truth Podcast.
Want the truth? You can't handle the truth.
Where we aim to explore questions of truth, the scriptures, and what it means for the church today. Here are your hosts, Rob Dalrymple and Vinnie Angelo.
Hey everyone, welcome into the podcast. We have a special guest today as we go through the book of Revelation, and we're going to spend a lot of time in there. We're going to bring a lot of guests on. You know, we periodically bring on guests to help give just general overviews, people who are scholars or experts in this realm. So, Rob, you have a friend of yours coming on, a colleague coming on. So why don't you give his intro?
Well, it's a privilege to call Mark a friend. Dr. Mark Wilson is the founder and director of the Asia Minor Research Center in Antalya, Turkey, the country where he and his wife Dindy have lived since 2004. Mark received his doctorate in literature and philosophy and New Testament at the University of South Africa, where he's also a research fellow. He's a professor extraordinary of New Testament at Stellenbosch University. He's a member of many academic societies, including the Society of Biblical Literature, the Evangelical Theological Society, where Mark and I first met up as on the committee for the Book of Revelation study group for the Evangelical Theological Society, and also the American Society of Overseas Research. Mark is the author of numerous books and articles, including Biblical Turkey, Victory Through the Lamb, and The Spirit Said Go. His particular research interests are the Book of Acts and the Book of Revelation. He regularly leads tours in the Eastern Mediterranean. Mark is just an expert on the seven churches. I'm just going to insert this into your bio, Mark. Mark is an expert on the seven churches. He lives in Turkey, and this is what he does. So he and his wife, Dindy, have been married for 49 years. They have 4 adult children and 4 grandsons and 4 granddaughters. So, Mark, welcome.
Oh, glad to be with you.
Thank you for being with us. So, Mark, let's just begin by having you tell us a little bit more about your story. And even how it is that you've kind of live in Turkey and maybe about the work that you do there in Turkey. And we'll give a plug about your tours and stuff like that at the end of the show.
Sure. Well, I'd never been out of the country, got a late start with my education. And in the early 90s, our church in Virginia Beach, Virginia, where we were living, got interested in Turkey. And they were doing a small trip to Western Turkey in 1992. And so I joined that. And for me, it was really a life-changing trip because I was just beginning my own doctoral study at UNISA on the Book of Revelation, the 7 churches. And we did a tour of all the churches and returned home. And it was just an eye-opening time for me. 93, I began my own doctoral program and then actually led my first tour over here to Turkey in 94 and 95 and just started coming back regularly. After finishing my doctorate, I taught for 4 years in the New Testament program at Oral Roberts University, began taking some student groups over from there. Then my wife was saying, well, you go to Turkey all the time, maybe we should think about moving over there. And so we moved back to Virginia Beach, reconnected with our church there again. And in 2004, they sent us over here. In 2001, we had spent 4 months in Turkey, kind of traveling around, spying out the land, and decided that we were going to first settle in Izmir, which is biblical Smyrna. We lived there for 6 years. Then we're in Istanbul almost a year. And then in 2011, we moved down here to Antalya. So we've been here since.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Hey, I'm just curious, what is it like to be a Christian living in Turkey? This isn't the point of the conversation. We're going to get into the text, I promise. But it's just fascinating to hear of an American, white American Christian living in Turkey. There's got to be a lot of challenges.
Well, yeah, Turkey, with a population of over 80 million people, has less than 0.1% who are Christians in the country. And this comprises Orthodox, Catholic, and Protestants. So there's a very small Turkish believing church, maybe 10,000 people. And then there are a number of expats. This is the type of international church that we attend, English-speaking congregation as well. So we are very much in the minority here. Laws here are not very amenable for Christians. So it makes it challenging to gather and to worship.
Okay. That seems like a whole podcast in itself that I'd love to get into, but we're going to get into the text, but interesting stuff.
It is, and it's a little bit politically loaded to talk about it publicly too.
Okay.
I can imagine.
So we'll have an interview with you and have your name changed and your identity.
My face blotted out.
Yeah.
Wear a covering over my head.
Yeah, do the shadow.
We have a special guest today, Joseph Krieger.
Joseph Krieger. Nice. Very good. Well, hey, let's get into the text. One thing that we do when we bring on guests is we usually like to ask them a big picture question, and every scholar is going to have their own bent in terms of how they view the big picture, in a sense, maybe in how they see that aspect of it. What are you seeing as the central theme or some of the central themes in Revelation?
Soon after I finished my doctorate, I was invited to contribute a commentary on Revelation for the Zondervan Bible Background Commentary.
Which is fantastic, a great resource.
It is, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, it was a basic introduction, and it was a time for me to really delve into the text. And I really haven't changed my view, over all these years after I published that. And at the beginning of the commentary, I talk about 4 particular themes that I found in Revelation. So the first of these is God ruling from his divine throne is the sovereign Lord of history.
Amen.
Second theme, Jesus as the sacrificial lamb is victorious over Satan and the world.
Amen.
Third one, the world system typified by Babylon and the 2 beasts is opposed to God and his people.
Yeah.
And then the final theme is the saints who overcome will receive eternal rewards in the new heaven and the new earth. So that kind of summarizes for me what I think the whole message of Revelation is about. Which,
by the way, means I don't have to write my commentary because I think you just said it all.
Just by Mark.
Darn it. I got all this work done and now it's like no good. It's useless. So I was footnote. Mark Wilson said all this earlier, but I'm just reiterating because I wanted to publish my own book. So great. Hey, Mark, when we read the letters of Paul and the epistles of the New Testament, we usually discuss like the background, the authorship, the date of writing, maybe the city, its location. Like Corinth is kind of an important location for what's going on there in the city of Corinth, and the letter to the Corinthians, and maybe the historical context of the city and the geopolitical context of the Roman world, whatever it might be. So how much of this is important when it comes to understanding the 7 messages in Revelation chapters 2 and 3? And maybe can you give us a few examples to kind of get started?
Well, I think it's extremely important to understanding the situation in the Roman province of Asia. So I make that point because you often hear people talk about the churches in Asia Minor. Well, Asia Minor is a much broader geographical territory up to the Euphrates River. And the 7 churches are actually located in the province of Asia. So just kind of make that point there.
Which is a province in the west coast of modern day Turkey, right? It's a Roman province in the west coast of modern day Turkey. Yeah, thank you.
Exactly. And so these 7 cities, 2 of them are actually quite minor of these. And they're all situated along a road that the first Roman governor, Manius Aquilius, built after Rome brought Asia into the empire about 129 BC. And so there's a circuit that the messenger is making from Patmos, if we're correct in thinking that he's with John on the island there, who is an exile. And each of these cities has their own very distinct character. And so learning about the cities, learning about the geography, and the various civic and religious institutions are, I think, a very important background to understanding these 7 prophetic messages.
So you're saying that we should all go on one of your trips, is what you're saying? Yeah,
well, it's life-changing.
If we were to just maybe jump around a little bit and ask, just getting the background of some of the churches, the 7 churches that are referenced in the 7 messages, the Laodicean church, this is going to be backing up to the end of the sequence of churches. In verse 17, John writes that, for you say, I am rich, I have prospered, and I need nothing, not realizing that you are wretched, pitiable, poor, blind, and naked. What is the background of the Laodicean church? Is this a church that's just going to be like communally? Is this community going to be wealthy? Are they going to have a lot anyway? How would we interpret this from a background standpoint?
I think most of these churches are going to have a certain wealth because they're strategically situated, at least 3 on the west coast as port cities. But Laodicea being the junction of these 2 roads, one leading from Pergamum, one leading from Ephesus, and they were on this road that ran all the way to Antioch in Syria. So their just geographic situation was important for commerce passing east and west, and then linking from north to south as well. It was a very fertile region there. noted for its textiles and even in antiquity. So if you go to the modern city of Dindy, which is at the same location, it's a very prosperous city. So this sort of prosperity has survived in the region. And so I think this background is very important. And one of this is an earthquake zone. So, we just recently had a major earthquake in southeastern Turkey. Well, even in the ancient world, these cities in AD 17, particularly Sardis and Philadelphia, were heavily damaged. AD 60, Laodicea was almost totally flattened. And the Roman historians note this very interesting fact that the Laodiceans told Rome, we're going to rebuild out of our own resources. And so it's just an indication of their wealth and sort of an attitude that they had. I mean, what city or doesn't want help from the federal government?
Yeah, right.
No, everybody wants that, but the Laodiceans say, no, we can do it on our own.
Wow. What was some of the sources behind the wealth besides the fact that it's located with commerce? Wasn't there some things in the city of Laodicea that contributed to its wealth also?
Well, with its neighboring cities of Colossae and Hierapolis, they'd had a lot of exports to Rome, certain types of clothing and garments, other types of fruit. Olive oil is coming from this area. Wine is even produced there and still produced in the area. So between their agricultural products and some of the banking, it was a noted banking center too. So it had a lot of things going for them, at least on the financial front.
Excellent. All right, so staying in the church in Laodicea here, in chapter 3, verse 15, it says, I know your deeds, that you're neither cold nor hot. I wish that you were cold or hot. So because you're lukewarm and neither hot nor cold, I'm going to spit you out of my mouth. Now, that's been subject to a lot of interpretations here, Mark. Can you help us kind of understand what's going on there, what it means?
Well, it's interesting that the word water is not used there.
Right.
And in 1957, there's two British scholars who visited Laodicea, and they came up with a hypothesis for interpreting this that basically was talking about the inferior water that Laodicea had lay behind this metaphor, a temperature metaphor that we have here. And so that kind of expanded and grew to be sort of the prevailing view in New Testament scholarship about how to view this metaphor, with the idea that there was some warm springs that Laodicea got its water from south of the city, that it had a lot of calcium carbonate in it as well. And so there was a lot of problems with the water system. And this is, why Jesus was threatening to spit or vomit them out. It's a very strong word there in the Greek text, And but most of these suggestions came forth before excavations at Laodicea actually began around 2003. And the excavators there have published several articles now. And the problem, of course, is that they are in Turkish. So English scholars are challenged to be able to use this scholarship, but showing that Laodicea had a water system just like everybody else in the ancient world, just like Colossae, just like Hierapolis, Ephesus, and Smyrna. And so all these ideas of some sort of a deficient water system really doesn't hold water, this particular interpretation.
Forget
so
the pun.
Then you debunk one hypothesis, what do you put in its place? And so this has kind of been a research interest right now. And the only other really public structure that we have in all of the cities that we had in Laodicea too, that had these three temperatures, hot, cold, lukewarm, was the Roman bathhouses. And so they're famously known for their cold area, the frigidarium, then the tepidarium, and the caldarium. So when you come over and do a tour over here, you're going to go into a Roman bathhouse and see these three sections. And so this is my idea of what the image is talking about here. The bathhouses were noted for their luxury. They had the beautiful marble and mosaics and some of the most luxurious structures that were in these ancient cities. The decrying of luxury is a part of the letter here as well. The wealth that the Laodiceans and they were showing it in these beautiful bathhouses that they had. It was also a place where people went to snag a dinner invitation as they're sitting there in the baths in the afternoon. And so there's a dining motif in the letter as well. And so I think this is a possible interpretation then of what this temperature metaphor is all about. It's the lukewarm room that in the bathhouse that really has no value. You don't go there for that. You go to the cold room, you go to the hot room, but not to the lukewarm room.
Okay. So it has nothing to do with the fact that Jesus wants you either cold against him or hot for him, but not lukewarm.
Sermon illustration ever.
Oh my God.
Hot's good, cold's good, but lukewarm, yuck.
Okay, very good.
Hey everyone, we want to thank you for joining us on today's podcast. And we want to remind you that everything we provide at Determined Truth is free of charge. And this even includes all of the teaching that Rob does on a weekly basis to pastors in India and around the world. We don't have any supporters that get special behind the scenes access. But we can only do this with the generous support that comes from those of you who can afford to give. So if you would prayerfully consider supporting us with anything from $5 a month or more, we will continue to work hard to challenge the church to be the church. To give, go to determinedtruth.com and click on the Give tab, or follow the link in the show notes. When we mentioned earlier defining Asia Minor in that term and how it, even when we read it, that's something as Bible teachers we always have to do when we're teaching our congregations. When the term Asia or Asia Minor is listed in the Bible, it's not referring to the Far East in today's world, right? So this is the Roman world. So when we look at the average person, the average Roman citizen, or just the average person living in the Roman state, what does it look like for them? What would it have, generally, and then what would it have looked like for Christians living in these cities that, Christianity is only a few decades old at this point? What does life look like?
Well, when the Romans came in, they were very pragmatic in terms of administration, because Asia, modern Western Turkey, had a very efficient governance system during the Hellenistic period. And so the Romans simply allowed these Greek cities to continue to function with their council, their ecclesia, and their boule, and then they imposed a structure over the top of that with a provincial administration with a governor that they sent out. And so the majority of the residents in province of Asia are going to be what we call Greeks, Greek speaking, with some Roman citizens that come in, particularly Roman businessmen, who are coming into these cities and then being involved with the locals, fostering trade and sending goods and services back to Rome. So this would really be the ongoing governmental structure that you would see in all of these cities.
How many Christians, by the way, lived in each of these cities approximately? I mean, were the churches fairly small, as we might suspect, or were they? Any idea that we have?
This whole area of population estimates is really a difficult one.
Okay.
You hear population estimates, for example, of Ephesus, 250,000 or 200,000 for Pergamum. The sources I'm reading now saying these populations are way too high. I was just reviewing these for another project here today. And by taking the area of the cities and then projecting that, with modern demographic studies related to population density, they're saying, for example, that Ephesus may not have more than 100,000 people.
Oh, interesting.
And going all the way down to a city like Philadelphia probably had no more than 10,000. Oh. And so as a result of that, I think the size of the Christian house churches then would be commensurate with the size of the city. But in the house churches, if they're meeting in a villa type peristyle house, can hold no more than 30 or 40 people. And so if you've got a couple of house churches, in some of these cities, you're going to easily have less than 100 people, maybe even less than 50 people in the smaller cities.
Interesting. Now, it's very clear from the seven messages, and I think the seven messages of Vinnie and I will discuss in future episodes, have a very significant and strategic role with regard to the rest of the book of Revelation. They're not to be isolated from the rest of the book of Revelation. But it's very clear that there's something going on. And obviously the churches are all different. Some of the churches, things are going on and it's going all right, but they're suffering persecution because they're being faithful. Some of the churches, they're not doing well and they're giving in, and some of the churches are just being tempted to give in. What is it that the pressure to give in consists of? What's going on in the culture? What is John writing to them about, trying to get them to encourage them to, hey, do this instead of that? You know what I'm saying by that?
Yeah, if you kind of break down, like the spiritual look at what these churches are. I mean, some of them have pressures from outside. Others are dealing with pressures on the inside. Some are suffering, some are not. So it's kind of really a mixed bag that we see of their spiritual condition there. Some of the specifics in each of the prophetic messages is applicable to the church, and I think some of it's to all of them that are facing similar situations.
Okay.
And so it's trying to discern then which is which. I think as we interpret these letters is important.
Okay. So can you speak specifically then? Are there some specifics like the Roman imperial cult? A lot of commentators and authors will speak, hey, the Roman imperial cult was a big issue and it was threatening the churches. And if they compromise with the Roman imperial cult, they can partake in the trade guilds and things of that nature. Can you start speaking a little bit more about that kind of a context for us?
So after Octavian defeats Antony and Cleopatra at Actium in 31, and
BC.
It become BC now, and then becomes Augustus and begins they call the Principate or the Roman Empire in 27. We see very early these cities in the East that are used to paying homage to a living person as a god. For example, Alexander kind of brings this whole concept of the divine man, into the Greek East. In 29 BC, the provinces of Asia and Bithynia petitioned the Roman Senate to build imperial cult temples in the provinces. And so in Pergamum, the first temple was built in Asia, and in Nicomedia, the first one in Bithynia. Now, in the cities of Ephesus and Nicaea, they built sanctuaries, not to worship the emperor, but for the divine Divus Julius and Diaroma, the patron goddess of the city, who is the lady we see seated on 7 hills, later on in Revelation. And so these now become the basis for the imperial cult, with the elites living in these provinces, the leading Greeks and some of the Romans then worshiping at the temple. We see the second temple being built in Smyrna in AD 26. And so this became very much entrenched as part of the religious ethos then in the province of Asia. Some of the smaller cities then would have sanctuaries or special imperial rooms that they would dedicate in the civic centers. And so this imperial worship then became pervasive throughout the province.
And what was the consequence for not participating in that for the local Christians? Couldn't you speak a little bit to was this a situation that once a month they're confronted with the situation, or they're confronted with this on a daily basis, or something of that nature? And then what will be the consequences for not participating in this? And maybe even what does participation in this look like?
The most public display of this is we see statues of the emperor everywhere.
Okay.
And so what we see, the statues of the beast, are mentioned later on in Revelation. What sometimes is translated image of the beast. It's really the statues there, and they would be displayed publicly. They would be in temples, and there would be a constant reminder who is Lord, of the empire as people walked around. Now, in some places, they actually had to take oaths. We don't have any evidence, particularly of that in the province of Asia. Well, especially for elite people, if you're a believer and you're a successful business person, or you're a citizen of one of these cities, there'd be an expectation then that you would participate then in offering incense and sacrifices to the emperor, and so there'd be a tremendous peer pressure to do that, to accommodate in that way. For the poor people, I'm not sure how much the pressure would be for those. At this stage, I think it increases later on, but probably not in these early years so much for slaves and lower class people.
Well, when we go back to the third message, the Church of Pergamum, there's an interesting phrase in here, because there's an identification that says, I know where you dwell, the church in Pergamum. It's where Satan's throne is.
You're reading from Revelation 2, verse 13, right?
Yes, very good. Yeah.
Okay.
So this whole message is chapter 2, verse 12 through 17. And so it's this place where Satan's throne is, where Satan dwells, but this is also the place where the church in Pergamum dwells. This is really strange. And I think this is the only time in the messages where Satan is mentioned. Do we even see Satan mentioned again until, even in the whole book, until chapter 12 at this point?
No, we have an introduction to him here in this chapter, and then he appears later on. So it's a preview of him that as he comes onto the stage here briefly. There's been a number of suggestions on how to interpret this. One of them has to do with the largest altar in the ancient world, the altar of Zeus that stood on the Acropolis. And there's not much to see as you go to Pergamum today. The stones that were formerly on the altar are now in Berlin. There's a famous Pergamum museum there that has the restored altar. The second identification for this place where Satan dwells is the Asclepion. So this is the healing center of Asclepius, the Greek god of healing that was there. And of course, there was a bit of competition. Who is the healer? Is it Jesus the healer? Is Asclepius that was there? Some have identified it with the actual hill that the Pergamum sits on. It's a dramatic summit rising 1,000 feet up above the plain below. It really catches your attention when you drive into the modern village of Bergamo today. My personal view of the identification has to do with this imperial cult temple that was built here in 29 BC. When we go there today, that temple does not exist. The modern city has overbuilt the ancient Roman city. The Greek city was built up on the Acropolis, and the Romans built down below. And so that city is virtually gone. So it's somewhere down in the lower city. We do have an imperial cult temple, the fourth one built in Asia, the Trajan temple from the 2nd century, built on the Acropolis, but that's the only Roman structure that is up there. And so the fact that Antipas, who's the only named martyr that we have in Revelation, is mentioned here, it's only the Roman governor who can give the order for his death. And so the concentration of Roman imperial power there with the governor and the imperial cult is what I think is the right identification for this seat of Satan, because I think this is really the true opponent that the early Christians are dealing with here.
Right. Yeah. Very, very important. Very important, John. All right, let me read a couple of verses here from a couple of the different letters. Revelation chapter 2, verse 6, the letter to the church in Ephesus says, this you do have, that you hate the deeds of the Nicolaitans, which I also hate. And then down in the letter to Pergamum that Vinnie was referring to in verses 14 and 15, it says, I have a few things against you. You have there some who hold to the teachings of Balaam, who kept teaching Balak to put a stumbling block before the sons of Israel, to eat things sacrificed to idols, and to commit acts of immorality. And then verse 15, you also have some who in the same way hold to the teaching of the Nicolaitans. So can you help us understand what's going on here? What does he mean by the teachings of Balaam? And who are the Nicolaitans, and are they the same? And is this related to the Jezebel, maybe, which we can discuss in a minute if you want, in the letter to Thyatira?
Yeah, so one of the interesting things John does, he kind of drops things in there without explanation. He does this here, knowing that he's going to pick this up later, and you're going to get a fuller explanation. So, we don't really know who the founder of this Nicolaitan group is. There's been some discussion of some Nicholas of being a background there. We don't have to go into that. And of course, the Old Testament prophet Balaam is mentioned there, and he had the notorious story of how he suborned Israel, in numbers there, and caused them to fall into sin. So we have these two, Old Testament figures, Balaam and Jezebel, who are notorious false prophets, who lead Israel into idolatry and away from into apostasy. So both are mentioned here. And so, the whole issue of sexual immorality, eating polluted food or non-kosher food here, I think is an issue of accommodation and compromise that characterizes all three of these groups. I mean, they may have their own nuances of differences of interpretation. I think the bottom line is this is what they were, advocating, is that you can have one foot in Christianity and continue to have one foot, in pagan or in culture there. And this is what they're advocating. And I think this is why John is so adamant, in opposing those, and especially Jezebel there. She apparently had been warned before to cease and desist from her false teaching, failed to do that. And we have then this very stern warning, if you don't do this, I'm gonna basically kill you. I'm gonna put you on
this is the letter of the church in
Thyatira suffering. As we move on. So, and I think that both of those references to the Nicolaitans and the Balaamites leading up to the fuller explanation of this with Jezebel and Thyatira.
It seems that John in the book of Revelation, he's explicit, like you cannot eat food sacrificed to idols. You cannot commit acts of sexual immorality. But this seems to kind of go against what Paul says in 1 Corinthians, where Paul says, hey, it's okay, depending on whether your conscience and what, don't cause your brother to stumble. Is there a difference in context between the two, or something happening to help us understand that?
I think John and Paul would be in agreement about this. And one thing I frequently will mention about these messages, and we've been talking about these Old Testament figures of Balaam and Jezebel. John presumes that the Old Testament.
Yeah,
I think this is one of the big issues with readers of Revelation today. Many Christians have never read the Old Testament. I mean,
it's old. Why would I read
Sundays,
that? It's old.
Sunday school class. A show of hands. How many of you have read the Old Testament?
I got my New Testament and Psalms. That's good enough, isn't it?
Yeah. So he drops these names, events like the Exodus, many of these things that are happening in Revelation that are going on with no backstory. He presumes the backstory on these. And when you don't do it, you're going to get yourself in trouble with interpretation. And so this becomes a big issue related to that. So Paul and John, I think, are in agreement about this, because Paul is basically talking about eating this meat in a private home, in a private setting. And so, Jews would never eat meat that's sold in a public meat market. This would be the agora. So they would have their own butchers producing kosher meat. So, the whole thing with the animal would be sacrificed on a pagan altar, in the same way that the priests would get, the Levites would get a portion of the carcass when the animals are sacrificed at the temple. This would happen in pagan temples as well too. And then the rest of the carcass after this, the parts would be burned on the altar, then would be taken down the meat market and sold. So that's where you get your hamburger in the ancient world, here in the public meat market. And so for Paul, he's basically saying you can go and buy this, consume it privately. If you have a conscience problem with this, you probably should not eat it. And this is his teaching, but he said to go into the pagan temples, to the dining rooms at these places and eat it. That's where the problem comes in, And I think John is saying the same thing. And I think this is what Jezebel is advocating here, is that if you're a member of a trade guild, for example, this is your union card. And so the trade guilds would have their meetings in the dining rooms in these pagan temples. And so as a Christian, can you go out into these public spaces, eat this meat, under the auspices of this the god or goddesses? And I think this is where John is saying you can't do that. You need to withdraw from these public things. And of course, this is where you get this branding of Christians as being antisocial. Because they're now withdrawing from the public sphere in these cities and these institutions.
Vinnie and I are antisocial, but that's just for another reason. So we won't get into that. People don't want to eat with us. Is what we try to sit down, and they all just leave. So
We hope you're enjoying the podcast, and we want to remind you that everything we do at Determined Truth, the podcast, Rob's blog, and our YouTube channel, is available on the Determined Truth app. Directions on how to download the app is available in the show notes and on the determinedtruth.com website. Just click on the app tab.
In your commentary, you talk a lot about how sports, and I know that Vima that you recommended to me a while ago, who has a good resource on Revelation 2 and 3 and the 7 letters, also talks about how sports is a significant part in the cities of Asia. So you're speaking our love language to Vinnie and myself. So can you give us a little bit of a context of how sports was significant in how it related to these seven churches, and maybe it doesn't have an impact? Is it the victor's wreath? Is that what's going on in these messages?
Yeah, when you visit each of these cities today, you're going to see stadiums, and the cities built these, and they had these games that went around to all the cities, rotated among them to have the various types of events, whether it be running or wrestling and whatnot. You see various monuments here with the superstars of antiquity, with the wreaths, and inside the wreaths it tells where they won this at the Isthmian Games or in the Corinthian Games or the Olympic Games. And so there was they really loved their athletes in the ancient world too. They would get all kinds of rewards. Paul talks about this in First Corinthians, as he compares the Christian life to the stadium and the races that are going on there, and talking about that they're running for a perishable crown. Now, I like to translate this as wreath, because when we think about crown, if we were just watching the coronation of the new king in England, they're putting this massive metal thing on top of his head. That's not what the image here in the Revelation are talking about. A wreath of oak leaves or olive that is perishable. And so the victors then would be crowned with this Stephanos or wreath to signify that they're the victors. And so I like that translation of be victorious rather than conquer, which is more of a military image. We have obviously battles that are going on later in Revelation, so there is military imagery there, but I think in these opening letters, the imagery of being triumphant and receiving these wreaths is one that is very relatable to the interest in athletics and the stadiums that would have been in these cities.
So I am being spiritual when I watch Sports Center at night then. That's good. And Vinnie, by the way, you would really relate to these stadiums because they're empty.
I was waiting for something like that.
He's
the only thing I stay up for.
I'm sorry, he's a Los Angeles. He's an Oakland A's fan and used to be an Oakland Raider fan. He still is, but they no longer live and they no longer play in Oakland. So empty stadiums are kind of his love language.
Well, I still am a big NFL fan, and so when the Super Bowl comes on here in Turkey, comes on at 2:30 in the morning. So I'm up all night to watch that every year. So
are
that's
you a
my
Seattle
one
fan?
Sacrifice of sleep every year.
Who do you root for?
I don't really have a team. I just like to watch good football. So
there you go. Yeah, okay. So you don't watch the Raiders. Okay.
Kick a man while he's down. I will overcome this.
I put you on the ground. I might as well just take advantage of you while you're
That's right.
That's right.
Hey, Mark, I have a question for you. Rob and I in past shows, we've talked about going over and visiting Jerusalem. I think I want to say we talked about that when we had Bruce Fisk on, but yeah, we talked about like the experience of what it's like to be over and experience that. And I know many churches will do pilgrimage trips to Jerusalem and whatnot, but you actually lead trips to around Turkey and you visit these sites. I know this is something that my church actually did a couple years ago. They did a Turkey Greece trip, and they saw the seven sites of the seven churches. What are some of the big takeaways that you've seen that folks get when you lead these tours and these kind of experiences? Because this might not be the original bucket list biblical trip. Usually it is, I need to go to Jerusalem. Well, why would someone want to go to Turkey?
Well, I mean, you're right. Israel is the first place they go. And after they've been there maybe once or twice, they say, where else can I visit? And they start looking around. And they say, well, wow, Turkey's got a lot of biblical sites too. So people come here and they do Paul's journeys. That's one of them. And then the second big one, as you mentioned, is the visit to the seven churches. So I think one of the first things people get is these are historical places. I mean, they're not some myth. They're actual ancient cities that we can go and visit today. And so I think they see the whole Revelation being grounded first of all in history, and it can be explained, in terms of the Greco-Roman world in the first century when it's written. I think the second thing people gain is just the distances, between the cities and their relationship with one another. We go around each site, we tend to read the prophetic message on site. And so people, get I think a real spiritual sense of place, as they're connecting that particular message with the place that they're standing in and looking around and seeing the same things. The hills, the topography hasn't changed. In some of the restoration, like at Laodicea, some of the structures they're seeing, some of the world then of the first audience of Revelation. And so I kind of like it from going from a 2D to something 3D reading of Scripture now. It's just not the words on a page, but you've been there. You can visualize what Thyatira looks like. You can what walking down the main street in Laodicea is like. And so I think it really transforms the reading of Scripture for people when they make a trip like this.
Yeah, for me, it was always it's no longer a map on the back of my Bible. Now it's a vivid image because I've seen it. I know where it's at. I have an idea where the land, not only the landscape, but its location to other places or whatever. And okay, he's here. Jesus on the Mount of Olives speaking back to and things like that. So yeah, very, very good.
Yeah, it really does.
Hey, Mark. So anything that we missed, that we left out, that you want to kind of address, or some hey, this is really significant for understanding the seven messages, or something like that at all?
Well, we can talk about Jewish communities just a bit. I think
good.
Because I know you worked on that.
Well, that's fine. No, go ahead. Yeah.
So very important to the background of Revelation is the Jewish communities we have in all of these cities. I mean, there's a large Jewish population, and they really become the first followers of Jesus in all of these cities. I mean, when Paul comes into Ephesus, and spends 3 years there, he goes into the synagogue first, and they become some of the first Jesus followers in the cities. And I honestly think these are some of the people who are actually interpreting the revelation to the others, because they understand who Balaam is and they understand who Jezebel is. And for the pagans who have no background in Jewish scriptures at all, how do they learn? So they learn, I think, from their Jewish brothers and sisters, there in these congregations. And I think, we have this phenomenon in two of the letters in Smyrna and Philadelphia, where this mention of this challenging phrase, synagogue of Satan, is mentioned there. And to me, it seems like this phenomenon called the parting of the ways is going on in these communities here. I know some people don't believe that there was a parting of the ways, but I think the very moment that Paul sets foot into a synagogue and begins preaching Jesus as Messiah, there's a separation that begins in these Jewish communities in these cities. And we see this everywhere that Paul goes. Some believe, but then eventually they're forced to leave the synagogue. And it's important to realize that a synagogue in the ancient world is more than just a worship center.
Right.
It's a community center, really, where there's teaching that's going on. There are hostels, food kitchens. So they're a full service sort of place. There are guest houses for travelers, that Paul would be staying at these as well. And so I think up to a certain point, the Jewish communities were allowing Jewish followers of Jesus to continue to participate in the community. And then at some point, they just, especially here in the latter half of the first century, when now Christianity begins to be persecuted, you have the big persecution by Nero after the fire in Rome. Suddenly they become persona non grata, in these cities. And because because Judaism is a legal religion, suddenly they have these potential criminal Christians, attending your synagogue. Could be looked on by the authorities.
You mean criminal Christians because the Jews look at them and go, "Hey, you guys aren't truly Jewish," and therefore they don't get the exemptions from the Roman law that we Jews do. Is that what you're referring to?
Right, because the Christians, are not don't have a legal religion. For a period of time, they're kind of viewed as under the umbrella of Judaism, and then with the Neronic or the persecution under Nero, suddenly they're seen in their own right as a non-legal superstition that the Romans begin to try and stamp out. So I think this is part of the tension that we have going on here in these two communities.
And for you, Mark, I know you hold to an early date for the authorship of the book of Revelation. You date it between 68, 69, 70, before the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. And so that the parting of the ways, by the way, is a reference to the division between the Judaism and Christianity becoming two distinct things. So for you, that certainly hasn't happened yet. And the persecution of Nero is significant. And so if the Jews are saying, hey, you Christians are not part of us, to the Roman authorities, then that's the cause of intensifying any persecution against the Christians.
Yeah, I just see this as part of what's going on here in the late 60s with the Jewish revolt that's taking place, the upheaval in the Roman Empire, the year of the four emperors in 69. So there's insurrections going on in the province of Asia as well. So it's just a real breakdown of law and order that really looks like the rhetorical situation we have in Revelation.
Right. And the revolt you're speaking of, by the way, again, is in Jerusalem, which happened between 66 and 70, but really escalated at the end of those years there. So very good.
Yeah, and we have the unrest actually that way in Asia, in Sardis and things as well. And then we have the rise then of this Nero imitator of coming back to life that happens in 69. So this phenomenon of what we call Nero redivivus begins to take place at this time too. So a lot of the imagery you see later in Revelation is beginning to unfold in this period.
And what you're referring to there, just again, Vinnie and I can discuss this later episodes as well, though, is Nero commits suicide in 68, but some legends began circulating around he's not really dead, and there are a couple of imposters over the next couple of decades, and the earliest of those was during this time that you placed the book of Revelation. So,
it's like Elvis sightings.
Yeah, exactly. He was so terrible they couldn't believe he was actually dead, kind of like what happened with Hitler and some of these other despots.
Okay, very good. Interesting. All right. Hey, how can our listeners kind of keep up with your work, follow what's going on, be aware of like the ministry that you have, the tours that you lead there, receive maybe your newsletter if they're interested in keeping in touch with the work that you're doing, you and Dindy are doing, or if they want to travel to Turkey, how can they find out about your trips? Of course, if 10 people sign up, then Vinnie and I get to go along for free. Just want to let everybody know that. So, and we'll post all this in the show notes. So if you kind of give us a verbal thing here, then we'll put some links in the show notes.
Hey, that's a good invite. You guys can come and lead a Seven Churches tour over here.
No, we're going to follow you, Mark. You're leading. I hate to tell you this. You're leading.
Yeah, thanks for the invite to do this, because I put all my papers that I've written and published up on academia.edu. So a number of those are things on Revelation. Both of us have articles coming out in a new volume on Revelation called John Among the Critics. So we encourage people to pick up a copy of that later this year when that's available.
Yeah, that should have been out like a year ago, right? I mean,
it should have been out. Yeah,
it's due any day now. So, yeah. What was your chapter in that book on, Mark?
John and Government. And I just was looking at years again on anti-Semitism in Revelation. It's just an excellent chapter. I highly recommend it. So
thank you.
I think we think alike on a lot of these issues. So
Good,
very simpatico.
I
have a very interesting or easy email address, just Mark Wilson spelled out, MarkWilson at sevenchurches.org. So spell it out, SEVENCHURES.org. Mark Wilson at sevenchurches.org. People can get in touch with me, put them on a newsletter list like you're on that, Rob.
Yes, I love reading it every month. Yeah, it's great.
We try not to overwhelm people with that and give updates on what's happening with us in Turkey, and usually send along an article I've published. Regarding tours, I work with an agency based in Izmir called Tutku Tours, TUTKU, Tutku Tours, and the website is just tutkutours.com. And all my tours are listed there, or they can people write me at my email address, and I'm happy to answer that and give them information on my next tours.
Excellent. All right. Hey, Mark, what a privilege. What a pleasure. And I know we'll be together. It'll be like 6 months when we'll probably meet up in San Antonio this year. So I look forward to hanging out with you then. Thank you so much for your time and your friendship, as well as I don't know what Vinnie was thinking, but I don't think you were looking at any notes. I think Mark was simply just all the historical data, the contextual data, the geographical, it was just coming right from him. Like, I felt like we're standing out in the ancient ruins of Ephesus and you're just speaking to a tour group without any notes. So it's just a wealth of knowledge and just a pleasure listening to you, and thank you for contributing.
No, my pleasure. Thanks for the invitation to join you, and thanks for all you guys do. You're doing a great job.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. And we can't recommend enough your little commentaries. You could download it on Amazon Kindle for less than $10, I think, on through the Zondervan Illustrated Bible background commentaries. Great background information, if and it's highly accessible. You could be a layperson. You don't have to be a scholar at all to understand what's happening. And Mark presents this great information in a very digestible way. So thanks just for the contribution that you make to helping us understand this book better.
Yeah, and I'll put a link to that in the show notes also. So yeah.
Fantastic.
Hey, thanks again, Mark. Take care.
Yep. See Mark and see everyone else next time.
God bless. Come and see me in Turkey sometime.
Yeah.
I want to thank you for joining us on today's podcast, and we would love for you to share the work of Determined Truth with others. Please follow this podcast and give a review on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Your review will go a long way towards helping others find this podcast. Then share it with others so that we can get the word of the gospel of the kingdom to more people.